Like and subscribe for endless entertainment.
Our story starts off with a living doll waking up in her room. She changes into a maid costume and eats before going to serve her master, Kate. She walks into the room and greets her shadow. She tries to give her worker without pay a name but decides to do it later. The maid begins cleaning the room, but she begins to wonder about Kate's appearance. She explains that the shadow people at the manor constantly release soot when they feel strong emotions, as the maid continues cleaning, but she proves that blondes have negative IQ by breaking the things around her. The klutz wonders if she is malfunctioning, but she doesn't know how to fix herself. The maid begins cleaning the mess she made with her clothes, but Kate comes to scold her for it, because living dolls are supposed to be the faces of their shadow masters, so she must never neglect her appearance. The maid suddenly collapses on the floor and prepares to become a hashtag, but Kate realizes that she is just hungry and feeds her with good food. The maid begins stuffing her face and eats until nightfall, when they then go to bed. The next day, the maid overcomes her blondness and cleans all the soot early, so they decide to play cards, where Kate realizes that her doll might be a little special because she can't read. Kate tells her to wake up early tomorrow so they can have reading class before she cleans, but of course she overslept and arrived late to see a pissed-off Kate waiting for her. She tells her to clean the room while she bathes, which she somehow accomplishes with surprising speed, so Kate sends her to take a shower, but her stupidity has no bounds as she somehow managed to fork that up. Kate decides to give her a makeover, which the maid praises her for. Hearing this, Kate sits down and laughs for the first time, then decides that it's time to give her a name, so she names her living doll Emilico after the hero of her favorite book. The next day, Kate wakes up hating herself because everything she touches gets dirtied by soot, while Emilico wakes up shining like the sun as she eats stale bread and gets ready for her maid work. She enters Kate's room and finds it a mess, but Emilico is now a master of the secret art cleaning technique and low-diffs the room. She returns to her box when another maid, Mia, brings Emilico to the room they'll be cleaning, where she sees many other workers who don't get paid. Mia introduces her to the other members of their team, who are team leader Rosemary and Quiet Lou. Emilico falls from shock about how big the plantation actually is. Then Rosemary gives her cleaning equipment and continues the indoctrination by making her do free labor with them. Emilico rushes back to Kate, being overly optimistic about completing her work for the day. She goes to get a blowjob and returns after being sucked off to continue her day by cleaning Kate's room, but Emilico accidentally spills a glass of water, but she uses her quick thinking and grabs the doll to absorb the mess. Kate gets angry at Emilico for damaging her doll and scolds her before leaving for a bath. Emilico goes to her box and begins to cry, but decides that she is going to make a new doll for Kate and apologizes to her. Kate accepts her gift and apologizes to Emilico for not making her rules about the doll clear, before sending Emilico to continue her free labor, when the doll that she made for herself drops, so she decides to test the fall damage. Kate rushes to the door and breaks the rules by going outside for the first time, where she sees that Emilico didn't get hurt. They decide to go back, where they encounter another shadow, Sarah, and her doll Mia. Emilico tries to introduce Kate to her, but Mia only mimics her shadow and expresses her emotions. Sarah begins scolding Emilico for not expressing Kate's emotions, but instead her own, then leaves feeling disappointed in them. Emilico walks while being depressed that she's bad at being a doll, but Kate cheers her up, then sends her to her box, where Emilico begins to wonder what the shadow house actually is. The next morning, Emilico walks down the hall where she sees Mia. She reveals to her that it was her shadow's emotions she was showing and not actually her own. Then they decide to give her a full tour of the children's wing of the house. They show her many rooms in the massive mansion until Emilico sees a locked hallway, where the group reveals that it's the debut hall where shadows and their living dolls are tested to see if they can become an adult. She begins to wonder what happens if someone fails the test, so Mia explains that the purpose of the dolls is to be devoted to the shadow family, and dolls that are not useful are discarded. A bell suddenly begins ringing and all the free workers begins equipping full gear. The team reveals that if soot isn't cleaned, they can form together into creatures called Scorches that can fuse to make phantoms that attack people. The cleaners smash the phantom, but it turns into Scorches and runs away, so they chase after it and enter a room. When Rosemary suddenly comes in and is attacked, it begins suffocating her and forms a phantom to take her as a hostage. Mia goes under Rosemary to stop the phantom from necking her, while Lou goes to get water to spray the creature, but the monster's too tall, so quick thinking Emilico goes for a vase and throws water over the creature to save the life of her teammate. Rosemary gets up and walks into a wall, and they realize that she has soot sickness, so the medics come in and takes her away. The next day, Emilico travels with the remainder of her team to the bath. She goes through many wash cycles with Mia, and Emilico begins realizing that not all shadows are as patient as Kate. They meet back up with Lou along with Rosemary, who explains that she has been cured from the soot sickness by drinking water. Emilico goes back to Kate and tells her all that happened. She begins to complain that the dolls aren't where they should be, but Emilico tells Kate that they are moving on their own. Kate scolds her for lying, but the doll suddenly jumps in the air. They test if Kate is the one causing it, and it's revealed that she's the reason. Emilico reveals that she made the dolls from Kate's soot, so that's why she has the ability to control them. Kate begins training to control her new power, to the amazement of Emilico, but decides that because no information is known about her ability, they must keep it a secret from everyone else. In the morning, the dolls get scolded by the leader of the Starbearer, Barbie. She accuses them of being lazy in cleaning and causing a phantom to be formed, but Mia tries to give her an excuse and gets a tummy tuck as her prize. Emilico calls the psycho Barbie mean and gets her attention, but is saved by Sean, who knocks her over accidentally because he can't see well. He gets fisted by Ricky for disrespecting a Starbearer, when Rem suddenly knocks over a jar. The demon Loli goes over and blames her for causing everything, but Emilico tries to help her, so Barbie decides to assign Emilico, Sean, and Rum to figure out what caused the phantom on top of their free labor. In the night, Emilico and her team decide to wander the hall to investigate, but they discover nothing unusual. They explore the halls night after night, but they find no leads on the phantom, so on the fifth night Sean comes in clutch with sleeping bags for everyone so they can get some rest. Emilico thanks Sean for saving her from Barbie. When Rum suddenly begins crying because she's useless, Emilico has maxed charisma and cheers her up, but they begin hearing something coming in the distance, so Rum does the race thinking it's a phantom. While Emilico and Sean are confronted by a veiled doll, who takes care of the manor while everyone's asleep. They wander the mansion while looking for Rum and finds a door that leads down a dark hall. The pair travels down the path, but Emilico activates a trap that almost made her past tense, so they decide to go back, but Rum suddenly screams through a wall, leading Emilico to jump through the hidden door and finds her in a dark room. They see many Scorches beginning to form, but Emilico plays Mario, so she knows what to do. A phantom suddenly forms and Sean decides to beat it to unalive. Emilico catches it in a blanket and Sean scores a goal to eliminate the monster. They realize that a trapdoor is loose and goes up to see soot falling from the pipe that comes together to form Scorches, which then turn into phantoms. The next day, Barbie dismisses the case because no one was responsible for the phantom's attack. Emilico gets congratulated by her team for solving the mystery, then heads back to Kate's room. She tells Emilico that their debut exam is tomorrow, to her surprise. They practice facial expressions before Kate sends her to get some sleep. Meanwhile, all the other Shadow Masters and their living dolls prepare for the debut in their own unique ways to ensure they'll pass. Kate puts a veil over Emilico's face as they head to the debut, where they find an instructor, Edward, who carries them to the debut hall. He commands the dolls to remove their veils, then tells them to show him what they can do, to the confusion of everyone. Kate decides to have some tea, where she meets Louise, who begins getting wet over Lou's face to the annoyance of Kate, but Emilico looks like she wants to explore her sexuality. Emilico realizes that Rum fell in rank, so she abandons Kate and goes over to give her a moral boost, but it causes Kate to also fall in rank. They go over to the table and eat sweets, where Kate begins acting like Emilico instead. The other shadows begin scolding Kate about her doll, which causes them to fall one more rank. She realizes that Emilico is dumber than she thought and maybe a little special when the instructor suddenly begins playing the piano. The shadows begin to dance to the sound of music, so Kate busts some soot on Emilico's legs and begins to control her while they move with each other. Kate begins to realize that even though Emilico is a garbage-tier doll, she is an S-tier friend. The instructor suddenly stops the music and demotes Patrick. John the God goes over and scolds him for his rude behavior, so he apologizes by showing all the shadows to the garden. The dolls begin arguing about going after their masters. Emilico eats candy and finds a hidden piece inside. The dolls decide to eat all the food, where they find many pieces. Emilico uses 100% of her brain power and realizes that the pieces fit the door and opens it so they can go after their masters. They see Edward sitting by a fountain and ask for their shadows. He tells them that their mission is to find their masters in the garden and exit it before the time expires, with the condition that the doll's face should not be injured and the shadow's clothes should not get messy. He tells them to select from a pile of items in order of their rank. Lou picks the shear while Sean picks a magnifying glass as Ricky picks the soot suit, followed by Rum who picks a lantern, then lastly Emilico picks a wheelbarrow. Each doll is given a small package and sent into the garden in different directions. Patrick uses the magnifying glass to see that there are tiny black dots on the map that shows the location of their shadows. Meanwhile, Emilico decides to track down Rum so they can work together. They walk through the maze where they suddenly encounter a waterway, so they decide to add it to the map. Ricky walks through the maze when he suddenly encounters Lou, cutting her way through the maze, so he convinces her to work with him to find their master together, as Emilico and Rum encounter the natural enemy of men. She pushes the carriage up the slope but nearly falls, so Rum decides to be a homie and help her to carry it up the hill. They hear a huge explosion in the distance as John the Great blew apart his container to escape by himself. He explores the area where he finds Kate and asks for her hand in marriage, but she rejects his offer and tells him to return to where he should be so Sean can find him. He leaves her to return to his spot as Kate realizes that the debut is like a game where the adult shadows carefully observe them and judges all the children's actions. Sean walks into a trap and falls into a pit, while Lou walks straight into the open air but managed to save herself. She tackles Patrick to the ground and asks if her face is injured, where he discovers his type and gives her a clean bill of health. He notices that she's bleeding and makes a bandage to cover the cut, while Emilico finds Patrick inside a crate. She wants to help him but he refuses and sends her to find Kate. She gives him an orange and a flower, then leaves him to wait for Ricky. Sean crawls outside the trap to see Emilico and Rum, so they decide to trade information and head to find another master but discover a puzzle. Emilico realizes that the statues can move and opens the gate where they find John's exploded crate. Sean begins to worry, but the goat shows himself to everyone, but Sean realizes that John's clothes is dirty, so they may have failed the test. John gets angry because they didn't tell the shadows of that rule. He decides to go back to Kate and tell her about the rule, then reveals to Emilico her location. They decide to part ways so John the man can get new clothes while the rest goes to find their masters before the time runs out. Ricky and Lou wander the garden where they see a soot trail. Lou instantly realizes that it's her masters because all the shadows emit soot in different ways, surprising Ricky that she's much smarter than him. They see Louise practicing BDSM in the well and frees her from her trap, as Ricky stands there menacingly looking at the reunited couple conveniently standing by a hole. Emilico and Rum open a door and see many scorches, so they piece the fork out. Emilico crafts a broom from her inventory, then equips her maid's armor. She travels through the door, mercilessly slaughtering all the baby phantoms who dare to cross her path, while Rum gives her directions because she memorized the map. They reach a dead end and realize that the map may have been a trick, but Rum realizes that there must be something that leads upwards, so they find a tunnel that's filled with scorches blocking the stairs. But the heartless dolls already had a taste for blood, so they run over them until they make it out. They decide to part ways because Rum is close to her master's location, but Rum begins crying because she doesn't think her master loves her. She reveals that they have never had a conversation before and she didn't even bother to name her, so she had to name herself. Ray of Sunshine Emilico tells her that she and Kate also have problems, but it's better to look at the positive side. Kate's cage begins to fall as the chains come loose because a vent is drawing in her soot, but she hears Emilico coming, so she begins to calm down. Edward sits playing the piano while overseeing all the players, but he suddenly sheds his human skin and turns into a shadow while using his abilities to make notes spiral around him. The adults discuss Edward's debut and reveals that the Shadow's final test is to take over their living doll bodies, but the doll must be loyal to accomplish this goal. John and Sean find themselves at a revolving door that has to be opened from the other side. Ricky comes to the door and they decide to help out each other, but Sean realizes that he has loose shear. He accuses him of doing something to her, so Ricky walks away thinking no one would believe him if he told them Lou gave him her loadout because she wants him to pass the test. A bell suddenly starts ringing that shows that Lou and her master are the first to complete the debut, so Sean realizes she's okay and tries to call back Ricky. Edwards triggers a trap straight out of Tomb Raider to Abito Ricky, so he runs for his life and begs for them to take care of his master after he passes, but John the Goat steps forward and easily annihilates it like the majestical god king he is. They part ways as John and Sean goes towards the finish line while Ricky goes over to save Patrick from his cage, as Rum finally makes it to her master and begins to cut her free. Emilico makes it to Kate's cage and tells her about all that happened so far, so she tells Emilico how she ended up in the cage and says that the only way to free her is with the keys from the beginning of the test. Hearing this, Emilico decides to go and try to cut through the thorns when Ricky and Patrick passes by and see Emilico having trouble, so they decide to give her loose shear before continuing to the end. Emilico cuts through the thorns and reaches the control panel, but it's locked. The cage begins to fall, but Kate held onto the roof, so Emilico jumps towards her and catches Kate as they fall into the carriage filled with flowers Emilico collected. Her brain juice starts leaking, so Kate carries her to a river and begins cleaning her, but they realize that they don't have enough time to make it back to finish the test and begin to embrace each other. While Edward begins doing a villain monologue about his master plan, but he hears something weird and rushes upstairs to see them using the waterway inside the carriage to head towards the finish line as Kate steers them in the right direction. They crash into the wall and get thrown into the air, but Kate comes in clutch and sprouts wings to give them style points and completes the test. Shirley and Rum walk along the path as her Shadow Master calls Rum's name for the first time, but begins to slow down and dissolves into pure soot, while Rum cries for the loss of her master. In the debut hall, Emilico gets a new fit for completing the test, but they warn Kate that she shouldn't speak about soot powers with anyone because it's a close-kept secret. The children are applauded for completing the exam and a ceremony is held. The pair are given suspiciously dark coffee, so Kate puts it away, but Emilico drinks it all. Rosemary and her Shadow Mary Rose come by to congratulate them while Mia and Sarah praise her in the most mean girl way possible. The children are called to the front, where everyone realizes that Rum has failed. The shadows begin to question the morality of the situation, but the living dolls seem to be acting strangely. They head towards the garden where the goat hands Kate a note as the Shadow King arrives, who causes all the living dolls to orgasm just by his presence, but Kate realizes that the coffee may have contained some of that good shit. Edward meets with the Shadow King and gives a report on the debut. He goes on to explain that a shadow is a type of fairy that mimics the form of humans, then they acquire their personalities by interacting with the dolls. And to become an adult, they gain the face of a human by taking over their body, but if a shadow fails to gain a personality, they begin to crumble away. They begin to suspect there are living dolls that aren't following the rules, so they decide to make all dolls drink coffee that will keep them loyal to the Shadow House and reveal that Rum was also given this coffee to be repurposed as a veiled doll. They promote Edward to be in charge of the children but punishes him because only one shadow failed the test. He walks away while plotting another plan to rank up inside the Shadow House to catch Kate plotting against the king. Emilico begins cleaning the room while now showing an absolute loyalty towards the Shadow House. Kate begins investigating ways to bring her back to normal by looking around inside her box. Kate finds Emilico's diary that tells her about all she has experienced so far. She finds out about soot sickness and that by drinking water she can be cured. So Kate forces Emilico to drink water until her gag reflex activates, and even after that she is forced to swallow more until she began to cry. Kate goes over and embraces Emilico as she grieves for the loss of Rum until she returned to normal. Kate begins to explain to her that living dolls don't exist and they are just humans kidnapped and brainwashed from one of the towns nearby. Emilico decides she wants to free all the dolls. She goes to her box and hears a knock at the door, then opens it, but later when Kate goes to check on her she finds that Emilico is gone, so she rushes to get help from John the God. She explains to him that Emilico has gone missing and asks for his help. John realizes that Sean has been brainwashed and begins to slap some sense into him, but Sean's hands are also rated E for everyone, so they have a contest of might with John standing as the winner and freeing Sean from the brainwashing. Kate decides to invite everyone to a meeting to discuss Kate's disappearance, where Louise reveals that her soot power manifested and now she can gain full control over dolls, and says she saw Edward dressed as a veiled doll carrying Emilico on the food cart to kidnap her. Everyone comes to an agreement that they hate Edward and decide to help her rescue her from his hands. Edward disguises his voice and tries to get her to reveal Kate's plan, but Emilico ain't no snitch, so she keeps it 100. Sean comes up with a plan to dress up as veiled dolls to sneak inside the adult section to find Emilico. Kate decides to go by herself, so only her will be at risk, when they suddenly hear a knock at the door and finds that Barbie and her shadow heard them, so she wants to do an inspection on Patrick's room. They leave Patrick to keep her busy while Louise controls a veiled doll to open a back door and lead them to where the uniforms are kept. John and Sean decides to split up to look for a way to enter the mansion while Patrick and Ricky successfully evades the wrath of Barbie, who reveals that Edwards has ordered everyone to be on high alert as Ricky finally wakes up from his brainwashing. Kate dresses up as a veiled doll and thanks Louise for help as she leaves to find Emilico while Lou snaps out of her brainwashing. Kate meets up with John as Patrick arrives and tells them that Edwards is now in charge of the children's wing, so he must be below the 3rd floor. Kate decides to use Emilico's doll containing her soot to track her down, then thank them as she leaves to clutch the mission on her own. She hitman passes the other dolls and enters the room where they make the coffee, where she finds an open door with a chest inside filled with soot, but she has no time, so Kate leaves to find Emilico with a little shadow following her. She walks through the hall while feeling for her doll when she suddenly hears the voice of Emilico, and goes in her room to find her bondaged. She takes off the restraints, as Edward, mimicking Emilico's voice, comes behind her. He tells Kate that in the morning he will bring her to the Shadow King and pull a 6-9 so he can get a promotion. It's revealed that John the Great also dressed up as a veiled doll to follow after his queen, but he's confronted by other shadows and is forced to do the race, while following the little shadow. Meanwhile, Edward walks to Kate and Emilico, now thinking they have been defeated, but he falls into their trap as the little shadow covers him while they escape the room, where they run into John the Man and ran to the roof where Edward corners them. The Great Goat tells them to go, so Kate sprouts her wings and jumps with Emilico when John proves he's that dude and breaks out to use his powers to push Kate towards the house, but Edward follows them close behind. Kate's wings dissolve, but Emilico's a tank and carries her until she lands on some body pillows. Edwards arrives, so they run towards the children's area, where he attacks Kate with sound waves and tells them that he's going to send all of them to heaven, but the Star Bearers suddenly confront him because Louise called Barbara. He tries to give them excuses, but ain't no one believing that shit, so they report him to his supervisors. They banish Edward from the Shadow House for threatening to send the children to Shadow Heaven and dismisses him from their sight, but Edward decides to double down on capturing Kate instead of giving up. In the morning, all the shadows gather in the conference room for a tour of the 2nd floor, where Emilico begins to wonder who was the little shadow that was helping them, as it's revealed that she was Rum's shadow master, Shirley, who saved everyone. In the night, a mysterious figure tries to escape the mansion, as a wild Barbie finds out on her patrol, when Scorch suddenly appears and begins to attack, but Barbie is about that life and solos them. The Scorches begin piling up as the figure sneaks by them and escape back into the children's wing. Emilico is woken up by an alert and brought to the Great Hall. Barbie tells them to report anyone suspicious, then dismisses them back to their masters. In the morning, Rosemary and her shadow enter to teach them about their new responsibilities after passing the debut, and shows them all the new rooms they now have access to. Kate wants to talk to her squad but begins to suspect that she is being watched, so she decides not to, but John the God comes in to distract everyone, but before Kate can act they are invited by a star bearer, Susanna, who carries them to train. She reveals that this is a room for soot powers, and explains that the power of each shadow has a range, so the Great John demonstrates and realizes that his powers are only effective at close combat. While Kate shows off her skill by force pulling an object, and at the same time she passed a secret note to John while Susanna was not looking, but she somehow got the note and decides to look into it, making Kate start to panic. The Star Bearer begins to laugh as Kate comes to the realization that her soot power is a veil that she can put around people to sense everything that is within her domain, then apologizes and claims she did it to test her powers. Susanna is impressed with her test and gives the note to John as Barbara comes in and begins blowing everyone away with the sheer amount of soot that explodes from her body. Susanna explains that a shadow value is measured by how much soot they can produce, and Barbara creates 60% of the soot that the entire mansion uses. She wakes up with Barbie by her side, then walks with the other starbearers towards Oliver. He shows off his new machine that's able to suck up a lot of soot at once to defeat the phantoms. In the conference room, Barbara asks about Kate's movement, but Susanna says that she is acting normal despite Edward's warning them about her. They begin discussing the lurker in the mansion that still hasn't been found, causing Barbara to get angry and leave. She begins walking down the hall while Barbie glares at Kate's room. Kate suspects that she is being watched closer than other shadows and explains to Emilico that she gave John a note that has a secret message asking for help to defeat the Shadow King. In the night, Emilico goes to Sean. They realize that Lou and Patrick are still under the effect of brainwashing and they decide to somehow free them from mind control. In the morning, she meets up with her team. They tell her that a new debut test took place and all the dolls failed and were disposed of, causing her to begin seeing the mansion as more of a plantation than the paradise she saw before. They gather the dolls in front of a stage and force all of them to drink coffee containing soot that Emilico and Sean chooses to spit instead of swallow. All the dolls suddenly begin chanting in a euphoric bliss as they are being mind-controlled. Emilico cries to Kate about what happened, but Kate decides that since the Star Bearer controls the coffee, they should now aim to become a part of the Star Bearers. The next day, Emilico and her team goes and complete all her tasks. When they suddenly encounter the Bell twins where Emilico is tripped and shamed by them. The team decides to go to sleep, but Emilico wants to put stat points into her IQ, so Rosemary decides to accompany her to the library. She begins to get tired and gives Emilico doggy style as she falls asleep. Kate dances with Mary Rose. While asking questions about the Star Bearers, she begins to reminisce when she met an insecure Barbara years ago and decides to dance with her. But her feet ain't got no rhythm, so she begins to lose her head, but Mary Rose manages to calm her down as the former leader of the Star Bearers, Christopher, suddenly comes in. They go inside, where he tells all the children about stories and motivates them to always clean their room by creating the legend of a phantom formed by soot. Barbara laughs at his story while Mary Rose compliments him for his skills and persuasion. Kate decides to go to the training room to find out more about the powers of the shadows, but she is confronted by the Bell twins, who surround them like sharks and use their powers to make Emilico begins to act like a furry. But Kate can play that game too and trips their dumb asses to release Emilico so they can leave. The next day, Emilico assembles with her team and gathers in the conference room, but Rosemary is mysteriously missing. She walks back inside showing signs of soot sickness when scorches suddenly explode from her body, but they are much stronger than they should be. Many dolls begin to get infected and attack other dolls while the healthy ones try to restrain them. The Star Bearers arrive and begin slaughtering all the scorches around. One attacks Mia while the other stampedes, so Emilico tries to protect her, but she gets up and begins attacking Emilico until Lou restrains her before running away. A giant phantom arrives that begins to just stand there menacingly, but Oliver comes in with his new invention, the Gothic 9000, so Emilico takes it up and begins sucking the soul out of the monster while dodging its attacks. The Star Bearers break apart the phantom, but Patrick spots the robed person above controlling the monster, so they begin to chase after it. Sean gets close to catching up, so it releases a Scorch then escapes their grasps. The monster begins to launch Scorches as Boss Barbie comes in to give everyone orders. Emilico does an air takedown on the monster and begins giving the phantom a blowjob until it suddenly bursts apart into Scorches. They head towards the bells, but Emilico is a demon and takes care of them when the twins suddenly pick up the coffee bottles and break them on the floor to everyone's surprise, which causes them to be restrained and taken away. In the night, the Star Bearers hold a meeting to discuss all the incidents and conclude that it was an attack against the Shadow House. However, they decide not to tell Edwards because they fear the punishment they may receive. So Barbara calls all the children to the Great Hall, where she falsely pins everything that happened on the Bell twins and gives them a harsh and swift punishment. They are dismissed, but Barbara holds back Kate to question her about the incident. She realizes that they're trying to use her as a scapegoat to escape Edward's punishment, so she scolds them for all their accusations and says they'll never be as good as Christopher, which angers them. But Kate wants all the smoke and tells them that if she was in charge she would have already discovered who was behind the attack, so they say I bet and give her the mission to find out who the robed figure is. In Kate's room, Emilico congratulates her for being closer to becoming a Star Bearer. She begins to realize that someone besides her is trying to fight against the house because they broke the brainwashing coffee. Then she theorizes that it must be someone that has a high soot volume with the power to control Scorches, but she had no one that fits the description. The next day, the Bell twins beg to be released from the soot pipe. They are carried off and flushed before being put back again as Kate arrives to interrogate the living dolls from the incident. They go over to Mia, who explains that she doesn't know anything when they suddenly see Rosemary being carried off. They see doctors use water to improve her gag reflexes. Then Emilico begins to cry, but Kate consoles her and decides to explore and make a map of the children's wing of the house. They walk around the mansion when they encounter the Great John and decide to work together to draw the map. Upon completing the first and second floor, they decide to explore the third level. They go up the stairs and take in the view, where Emilico spots a cabin that they decide to make their secret base. They try to open the door, but it's locked, so the Great John pulls the entire wall down and almost makes them a hashtag. They find Oliver already inside doing research. He rushes towards Emilico and decide to examine why she's built differently, then introduce them to the members of the Shadow Research Division and reveals that they are making a mobile soot remover. Kate gets interested in their inventions, so Oliver begins telling her about all they have created. She asks about the incident and he reveals that he thinks that the robed figure is male because they seem to be very strong. So Kate comes to the conclusion that it may be Christopher, since no one knows what happened to him after he left the children's wing, but Oliver begins freaking out and refuses to speak about him. He instead tells her that he invented perfumes, and Sean comes to the realization that he smelled some on the robed person, so they decide to smell all the perfume and narrow it down to a list of people who matches the scent he smelled. They decide to go home for the day, but Oliver decides to give them a key so they can come back at any time. Kate decides to assemble the squad for a meeting in the night. She sneaks out through Emilico's box and solid snakes her way to Patrick's room, where everybody waits inside. She explains to them her situation and asks for help, but they refuse to assist her because they don't want to get involved with Edward. Kate realizes that she was being self-centered and decides that she needs to get them to like her, so she begins creating a soot man. They enter a training arc and master the art of soot sculpting to create surprisingly good art. The team bakes them so they'll never fall apart. They realize that Kate decided to create 2 sculptures, and she explains that she made one to give to Shirley if they ever meet again. Kate thanks them for their time and prepares to leave, but Louise and Patrick decide to help her look for the robed figure. Meanwhile, Emilico and Sean wander the mansion and enters an attic to find a window that leads to the roof. Emilico begins to wonder what's outside the shadow house since she can't remember being a human. Sean says he feels the same and wonders if they would be happier if they stayed or left. They go on to discuss a theory that the Shadow Masters get both their shape and personalities from their dolls, and realize that when Shadow Masters fail to debut, their partners are repurposed as veil dolls because they wear mourning clothes. Emilico decides that one day she will find Rum, where Sean suddenly comes to the realization that his real name is John, because the Shadow Masters take the real name of their dolls to gain human consciousness. They wonder how Kate knows so many secrets about the Shadow Mansion, when the clouds suddenly split and reveal the beautiful sky for them to get distracted by. Emilico heads inside, where she encounters the robed figure, who tells her that they're not an ally nor their enemy, then leaves. In the morning, the dolls are called to the Great Hall, where they decide to serve coffee with all the Shadow Masters watching everyone closely. Emilico goes and swallows her coffee and returns to Kate, now showing far more passion for her duties than normal. Kate restrains and tries to give her water, but she spits it out and begins playing. Kate realizes that she's not acting as obedient like the brainwashing of the king's coffee and theorizes that because the Bell twins broke the coffee, the Star Bearers only acted like the coffee was useful while using a shadow's ability to heighten the passion of all shadows in attendance, so she decides rest is all Emilico needs to be cured. Later on, they meet up with John and give him the mission to investigate the research team. He realizes that Jeremiah matches the height and build as the robed figure and goes over to see that they have been collecting scorches and confronts them. They extract the king's soot, then celebrate because they wanted it for research. They go on to explain that their task is to test energy by seeing how scorches act and communicate with each other and their environment. Jeremiah tells him that they aren't the robed figure because no scorches can naturally transform into a phantom without using soot powers. They show them a Scorch that they have enslaved to create power that could one day replace Barbara as the main energy source of the house so she won't suffer, when Oliver suddenly arrives and asks John to follow him to the Star Bearer's office. Meanwhile, Lou and Louise set out on their mission to find out about other soot powers by using Lou's pretty privilege to enchant them into telling all their secrets. After making Lou write down all the information, Louise decides to check if she has been invited to become an adult, so she goes to see Mary Rose while Lou slowly crumbles. She tells her that only she will know if she has been invited to become an adult, but to ask the Star Bearers about it. So she sends her off with a warning to treat her doll better. Louise heads to the Star Bearer's wing, where she asks Lou if she's alright, and she lies and says yes, before they arrive at the gym and see Benjamin working on his Chad bod. She asks if she has been invited to be an adult, but even he doesn't know, so Louise continues to question him about his workout. He decides to show her the benefits of being a gym bro by making her doll work out. But Lou has no stat points and strength, so Benjamin makes Louise do it as well, where she fails even harder. He explains to her that her doll can get tired just like her, then they decide to return to their wing. Louise asks Lou if she's tired and she finally confesses, which makes her master get worried and brings her to get some rest. Patrick and Ricky start their mission to find out about the children's wing by talking to their team leader, where he reveals that Barbara and Mary Rose were in the same debut and are the oldest masters on the children's wing. John and Sean suddenly come back from his meeting where he was scolded for trying to propose to Kate informally and was punished by the Star Bearers for not doing it the right way. The talks of marriage get Patrick's attention, so he decides to go to the library to research the topic, where he finds Sarah there researching the same thing. She tells him that only adults can get married, so as children they can only propose, but if their partner fails before becoming an adult, the other will be shamed for being maidenless. They decide to rest in the garden, where they meet another shadow that gives him a flower from her garden. They walk towards their rooms as Ricky tries to convince Patrick to propose to Louise because she came first in the debut. When they suddenly run into each other, Kate turns the corner as well, causing him to get nervous. He reveals to himself that he has fallen in love with Emilico, but decides that he will hide his feelings because he doesn't want to disappoint Ricky. They decided to hold a meeting together without the God King and go over all the information that they have learned. Kate comes to the conclusion that Sarah and Douglas were behind the attack, reasoning that they eliminated the Bell twins to become the new team leaders of their party. But John the Man comes in and disputes this by explaining how Scorches work to form phantoms, and since neither of them have awakened their abilities, it couldn't be them. Realizing this, Kate looks back at the list and eliminates all the people who lack the resources to create a phantom until she comes to a conclusion. They realize that the robed figure left clues on their map and goes to seek them out. The couple arrives at a flower bed where they dig up a bottle that gives a hint to their location. They head there and find the robed figure waiting for them. Kate begins questioning the motives of the robed one, but the Jedi pull a reverse Uno card and begins questioning Kate on her motives for keeping her friends in the dark, and explains that when shadows take the form of a human, they normally lose all their memory before they transformed, but they are different because they didn't forget. They accuse Kate of only manipulating her friends for a means to an end, which causes her to lose control, but John the King defends his queen and silences all the allegations. Kate blames the robed ones for causing the Star Bearers to suspect her and hurting many humans in order to achieve their goals, and even going as far as using her own doll as a heaven bomber to cause the havoc. It's revealed that the robed one is Mary Rose. She takes off her Jedi robe and congratulates them for figuring it out. Then she reveals that her soot power is to control Scorches. Rosemary also comes from the shadows, revealing that they planned all this together so they wouldn't be forced to become an adult and fuse into one body, by destroying the human soul before taking the shell as the new Shadow's vessel. Mary Rose says that she plotted all this to find allies to fight against the Shadow House, but when they got an adult invitation, she made Rosemary sick to buy time to find an escape route, but beyond the door there was a giant cliff with no escape. Mary Rose refuses to destroy her doll's soul so she can be whole, as Rosemary tells Emilico to take care of the rest of their team when she goes away and apologizes to them. Scorches starts attacking the dolls as Mary Rose begins controlling them. They seems to be too much, so Kate and John decides to run away until they reach into the open with their enemies chasing close behind. They lead their enemies into a trap which destroys all the Scorches. Kate declares her victory, but Mary Rose throws a Scorch at her that pulls her off the edge, but John comes in clutch to save her. Kate realizes that Mary Rose's power is to absorb and control any soot, as she takes the Great John's punch and turns it into a giant phantom formed by the god Soot to ride over the waterway. The king graces the floor with his presence because of overexhaustion, but his queen helps him up and they escape. Kate begins to wonder how far apart are the children's powers from adults. As Edwards walks the halls wondering why Rosemary got sick so soon after being invited, he deduces that she has been lowering her scores for years to avoid becoming an adult in the first place because she wanted to stay in the children's wing. They go and checks on the box that shadows go in to merge with humans, and see a cocoon containing a failed fusion which he claims will be Mary Rose's fate. The Scorches continue to chase the couple, so they decide to head towards the mansion for help. As John explains, their backup plan was to make their dolls drink water beforehand so they won't get soot sickness from scorches, so they awaken and rushes to find their shadow masters. They eat some bread to regain the stamina lost from using their ability, then starts back running until the pair arrive at a dead end while the scorches surround them. The Great John hands are rated E for everything, but the scorches are too dense, so they decide to jump into the water where they are safe, and begins walking towards the fountains so they can escape. Emilico and Sean searches for their master where they find a secret message from Kate which they use to try and figure out where they're going. Meanwhile, Kate uses herself as a decoy to gather all the scorches in one place so the king can boom them. But a phantom suddenly forms and grabs them as Mary Rose comes forth to reveal that since she can sense where the scorches are located, she knew their plan and was waiting for them. She begins an evil villain monologue, but John suddenly appears from behind to punch the fountain and destroy the phantom as it's revealed that the dolls and shadows swapped clothes and did a racist. They capture Mary Rose as Kate praises Emilico for figuring out the message so they could meet up and plan before confronting their enemy, while John breathes water inside the fountain before being saved by Sean. Mary Rose congratulates them for capturing the culprits before she turns them over for punishment. They are thrown in a prison cell while they vibe and await their sentencing. While Emilico meets with the Star Bearers, who invites her to witness Mary Rose's punishment. While walking, she apologizes to Barbara for breaking their promise, then reminisces about how Christopher brought them together while he led the Star Bearers. He made many changes to improve the life of both the shadows and their dolls to the point where he gave them positions of note until he got an invitation to become an adult, where he was never seen again. After a while, depressed Barbara went to Mary Rose for help, but she sends her away to be by herself. While walking, Barbara begins to lose control, so Barbie goes over to cheer her up, which resulted in her being hurt. They meet with the former leader of the children's wing, who tells them that they will never be an adult until Barbie's face is fully healed, so he gives her the leader of Star Bearers position instead. Barbara begins to change and gets more aggressive to maintain control over the children wing so she can get promoted and be reunited with Christopher. They meet with Edward and hand over Mary Rose into his custody, where they begin to walk together. She begins to remember the day she told Christopher and his shadow Anthony about the truth of the house. Then they started plotting against the Shadow King by changing the rules a little at a time to benefit them. But one day he received an invitation and left when suddenly Anthony returned to her room in a panic, where he reveals to her that shadows become adults by fusing, but when Christopher learned the truth, he sent himself to heaven. Shortly after, Barbara came by, but Mary Rose couldn't bring herself to say the truth, so she sent her away. They cross into the adult wing, where Mary Rose converts a hidden shipment of soot to form a giant phantom, and breaks through the wall and grab Edward, but he uses his power to immobilize them and shatters the phantom. He begins to do a villain monologue, but Mary Rose and Rosemary refuse to become a fusion and takes a leap of faith to reunite in heaven. Kate returns to her room to find a robed figure waiting for her. The robed figure praises her for overcoming all adversities so far, but warns her that at her current power she cannot beat Edward. Kate deduces that he is Christopher's doll, Anthony, and he reveals himself and begins congratulating her for using her power to catch Mary Rose at the bottom of the cliff to try and save her life. Kate asks him how he managed to hide for so long, but he tells her that he can only reveal his secrets if she becomes his student and walks around a corner to disappear without a trace. The next day, all the children are assembled in the Great Hall, where Barbara shuffles around the teams because many dolls were lost. Isabel and Belle come back into the wing after being cleared of her crimes, but the other twin isn't present because she have gone to a better place. They put Emilico in charge of her own team as thanks for solving the case of the robed figure, which pleases Kate because they're one step closer to being Star Bearers. The next day, Emilico wakes up late and rushes to her team. She goes to see Belle, who appears to be traumatized from her punishment and losing her sister, so Emilico decides to wake up early in the morning and clean with the strength of 10 men, so Belle can have some time to recover from her PTSD. She brings her gifts to slowly cheer her up, but one day Mia confronts her and requests that Emilico tells Barbara to dispose of Belle because she seems to be a broken doll. At the team leaders meeting, Barbie scolds Emilico for not functioning as a team even though they finish their cleaning each day and ask if Belle is broken. Emilico denies it and receive a tummy tuck. But Emilico is AG, so she still stands up to Barbara and tells her that Belle is working for both her and her sister's shadow masters, so she's tired, then declares that she will never again lose a team member.
Like for a cat girl, subscribe for a waifu, and remember to stay swifty.